Welcome back to Tasty Live. I am Dylan Ratigan. Time for a little more bootstrapping. My guest today is Alex Netty. He is one of the co-founders and the bosses at a company called Hive Systems. And I'll just read you the description, and then you're going to tell me what this means, Alex. The Hive Systems has grouped three different cybersecurity disciplines: strategy, compliance, and risk management, and offers solutions within those domains as wrappers to help scale with the threats organizations face without the sticker shock. So it sounds like a description, obviously, of cybersecurity, generally speaking, meaning when I hear cybersecurity, I think protect me from hackers, as walk me through sort of my layman's understanding of cybersecurity and what you're actually doing.
Yeah, and today, the hard part here in the digital age is that cybersecurity is something that impacts us all. And so while there's a few folks across the industry who understand cybersecurity, there's some folks within IT who also understand cybersecurity at a base level, and even some C-suites and boardrooms are starting to understand cybersecurity. It's still a tough place to operate. At the end of the day, for cybersecurity, it's about risk management. And so our goal at Hive Systems, including both our professional services and our products, is to help make that more approachable. So even for those folks who are in the know and understand the industry, they can approach it within reason. What are the ways and the activities that we're doing to help reduce risk for our company? For our products, it's the same deal, to make them easy to use and help people make actionable decisions. At the end of the day, again, cybersecurity is risk management, and that aligns with a lot of other aspects of businesses that have existed for hundreds of years longer than cybersecurity has existed as an industry.
It's interesting because I had an experience recently with needing to do some verifications regarding a potential that someone had stolen but there was a red flag that potentially someone had stolen my identity for one of the things that you deal with banking and all this. And I was discussing it with the compliance officer, who was basically making sure that I was me, and that we were matching everything up. Mm-hmm. And my observation was that the incentive for the hacker is much higher than the incentive for the compliance officer, the cybersecurity firm, or the target. Mm-hmm. Because as a target, no one wants to deal with it, right? You don't want to, right. You just don't tell me about that. I don't want to hear about that. If you're a cybersecurity firm, you have a pretty good incentive, because the more people are, afraid of losses, and the more you can reduce losses, at least you have a real economic proposition. Mm-hmm. But no one has the incentive that the hacker has, which is I can get $50,000, $5,000, mm-hmm. $500,000. $50 million. I can get a huge amount if I just get one of these, I'll send 1,000 shots. And if I can get
I hate to say it, but that's
one of them to stick, it's just so much more of an incentive for the bad guys in this domain.
Think about it from a business perspective, right? For a lot of hackers, it's a full-time job, and they have the opportunity to get a lot of money. What's the total addressable market for hackers? It's every single person on the planet. That's a great market and business to
every
be in.
Bank account and every tax return and every gym membership and every. It's a real big piece of real estate.
It is a huge piece of the puzzle. You're not going to find PEs and VCs backing hacker groups, because that's a bad idea for many reasons, but it is a lucrative business. I make a joke, and unfortunately it's a dark humor joke at the end of the day, but for a lot of hacking operations, they end up having better customer service than many Fortune 500 companies. They want you to understand how to pay to unlock your computer from ransomware, or to engage with them and pay them money to pretend that they're giving you IT services. Some of these groups have the best customer service on the planet, and it hurts, because for them, it is a profitable entity. They're running and driving a business. And so for us, when we don't realize that we are the victims in this, that we're on the other end of this business transaction, for a lot of people who are not maybe digital and technology savvy, we put ourselves in a tough position. So for us, and one of our main mantras has been about making cybersecurity approachable, so that people can understand.
What does that mean in a practical sense? So, what does that mean?
For us, it always comes back to the business. The reason that businesses are in business is to do business. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but every single company has something that they do. They have a service, a widget. And so our idea within cybersecurity is to say, great, we understand the thing that you are trying to do. One of the steps that I think we all missed as we plowed through the 90s and the dot-com era was that we ended up actually adopting technology to move faster. So we took something like, say, healthcare, where there used to be a clipboard on the end of a bed frame, and we said, you know what's better than that? What if we digitize it? That way we can keep the records. If the paper gets wet or it gets lost, we know where it is. Even better, let's connect it to the internet. We can share data for patients between hospitals. We're moving that same process, taking care of a human, and we're digitizing it. And the hard part is no one ever sat down and asked, why are we doing this? And better yet, should we protect this information? If that clipboard is at the end of the bed, only somebody in the room could ever access that patient's health records or maybe the medication that's been administered. I put it on the internet, it is available to literally anyone on the planet and beyond, I would make the argument. So when we stop and we say, hey, how can we actually look at that for us making cybersecurity approachable? It's about going back to the basics. What is it you're doing? What is it that you want to keep doing and not have be impacted by hackers and scammers?
So when you say available to anyone on the planet and beyond, are you also making a side argument in favor of life on other planets?
Yeah, always. It seems statistically reasonable that maybe there is. But I suppose as we continue to push out into our own stratosphere and then beyond, I suppose at some point, right? I guess we could eventually hear about in our lifetimes a hack originating from a Martian hacking crew, right? Martian being maybe humans living on Mars. I suppose that could happen.
And so, yeah, going back to my own experience, it felt that the penalty for the hacking doesn't reside with the business, it resides with the target client. In other words, I'm the one,
Mm-hmm.
whoever the person is, I'm the one who I'm supposed to check. They're like, oh, you need to check your credit report to make sure you haven't been hacked. Or you need to come into the bank or the institution and verify your identity and bring your old tax returns and bring your grandma, aunt's, uncle's pet dog name or whatever things are, right? But the burden is on the victim. And I feel like that to me seems obvious. I mean, that is obviously unfair.
Mm-hmm.
Should the burden not be more on the institution? In other words, if I give my data to your business and then that it gets hacked, the consequences of that and the burden on repairing that doesn't sit with the business; it sits with me.
Yep. Let's talk about the sad state of cybersecurity. That's exactly right. As end consumers for ourselves, our families, our parents, our grandparents, we're on the hook then to make up for the second part, really the after action of this hack. And I'm responsible then for taking care of myself. The company ultimately who caused that, who lost my information that I gave to maybe legitimately as part of a business transaction, signing up for a website, banking at a bank, just going to the doctor, at this point has more or less absolved themselves of the responsibility and they dump it on us. And not everybody is a cybersecurity expert, and it stinks. I'll be blunt about it. The hard part was for many years, these hacks and these breaches, which are huge and oftentimes used to carry a large reputational damage with it, just aren't carrying the same reputational damage it used to. You get a notification in your email, you get a letter, you maybe get some free credit monitoring that most people don't take advantage of. And as a result, these companies more or less get off for just a couple bucks.
So that's a second incentive, right? Where the company, who's the one who is responsible for the data, has limited to no incentive to protect the data.
Think about it in economic terms, right? For
the hacker
most
has
companies,
maximum incentive to steal the data.
And think about from a company perspective, for most cybersecurity practices and things at companies, it's often seen as a non-value add to the company, right? We are spending money on cybersecurity people and tools, and it costs us money. So if we don't, then I can probably balance it against the effect of, well, every couple of years, I'm going to pay out a couple $1 million in fines as a result of data breach, but I've come out on top for the amount I've invested in that. And that's the hard part is there's really no penal actions that go with a lot of this. There's starting to be more increase in other countries, especially with GDPR in the EU, where there are major fines for these data breaches and losses. But we don't have a comprehensive framework like that here in the US. There's a disjointed patchwork across states currently. And so for a lot of companies, there's no incentive to protect this information. And so that's a tough value proposition for us as consumers. What are we to do?
And also would reduces the incentive for people to do business with you or your competitors, I would presume.
Yep. It definitely makes it quickly more liquid. If I'm working with one company and they lose my information, I can just jump somewhere else, right? But the same thing is probably going to happen again. So it's this vicious cycle that we're stuck in right now. And so companies are saying, "Hey, how do I balance this? And what's it going to take for me to make this better for the consumers and the customers that we serve?"
And so, how do you advance your cybersecurity business in a world where the person who is going to pay you is the person with the least incentive to do so?
And I think this is probably just the maturation of the cybersecurity industry, right? We're starting to see it be more of a focus in boardrooms and C-suites. We're seeing it on 8K reports as people are talking about it more. And so as a result, it's ultimately becoming something that I think a lot of companies are saying, great, we were all scared about the cybersecurity boogeyman, but now we're starting to understand what are the value economics of breaches and protecting ourselves. Smart companies that do have a lot to lose are investing in cybersecurity. Oftentimes, they're unfortunately investing in the wrong places based on what they perceive to be the risk rather than the actual risks. And so there's a larger push for companies now to demonstrate, hey, this is why we're investing in ransomware protection, or investing in phishing or consumer protections to make sure that we don't have a data breach. We want to make sure that we're investing in the right area. And so as a result, it is actually taking what has historically been a black box of where cybersecurity teams operate and starting to be much more of a hot seat as those boards and C-suites are focused on cybersecurity teams. What is it you're doing for our company? The money that we're spending, show me the ways, the dollars that you're reducing risk. It should be a direct tie to it. That's great news for us as consumers because ideally, the biggest companies that have the most information from us to lose are starting to do more. And that's what we need to demand as consumers, and especially those of us within the cybersecurity industry.
So I was thinking about a series of interviews I did a few years ago, maybe even a decade ago, but with the head of, I think he was a senior IT person at the Department of Energy at the
Mhm.
time. And the topic of the discussion was cybersecurity, specifically at the Department of Energy, which some people may know is also the keeper of the nuclear weapons systems of the
Mhm.
United States, in addition to obviously the entire national power grid, both of which would seem to be important things to protect from hackers.
Mhm.
And the primary protection that was offered was that the system was so outdated and not wired that the nuclear sites and that the major power transmission and sites were so detached from the network that they were more like your hospital clipboard than they were like, whatever the latest than AI, than a brand new
Mhm.
refrigerator that's connected to Mars or whatever. And so that the first thing they said was, well, we're disconnected, and so that makes us maximum security.
Mhm.
And then as far as security is concerned, the way we plan for it is we anticipate we do not expect to protect it 100%. We
Mhm.
expect that there will always be a breach every day, and we focus on detection and layers of security such that we can detect and intervene before they stack through all those layers. And the second component, both of those answers actually made a lot of sense to me, which is one, you keep your system in 1975, you're fine. And two, don't try to create 100% defense perimeter. Instead, have a perimeter that will be breached and has enough layers and detection systems that it requires more than one layer of breach to get to whatever the treasure may be.
Dylan, you got this down. Do you want a job? I think you've got the whole speak
No,
in
no,
general
no.
concept.
I mean, but no, it just struck me very rational and so I wanted to get a sense of, your what you're selling and what you're doing, and to the degree to which it sort of lines up with the 1975 plus detection and redundancy.
Well, I'll give you a couple things there. Yeah, there's a long-held rumor, true or false, that yeah, a lot of our nuclear silos and missiles are launched via floppy disk. That there's probably some long-standing government contract for floppy disk manufacturers, and that you have to insert this floppy disk to launch the nuclear, missile. Outstanding, because what is the business process there? It's to launch the missile. Our job is to launch that and make that happen. How do we make sure that doesn't get impacted? Well, currently it's offline and it's launched via an archaic system. It's always going to launch
Can't
10
help it.
times out of 10, no problem, right? As long as those floppy disks work and stay up to date, you're golden. So why would you change it? Now, if they said it's run on a really old server that's connected to the internet so we can launch it from Washington via the internet, oh, that's terrifying, right? That's a different prospect for what it is. But currently, that works for them. And that's a great way of looking at it. The second part, that's exactly right. And this is why I say cybersecurity is about risk management. For us, it's about coming in and saying we cannot stop every breach. One of my favorite parts about this industry these days as over the years, hacks have slowly evolved. And at this point, honestly, a lot of these different hacking groups that we see working around the world, they're more or less like, or really just artists, and call them high art thieves if you want. They use a variety of techniques, right? You remember watching like Ocean's 11 and 12, and they're talking in Gobbledygook about different steps that go through. At this point, I'll usually hear about something happening, and I can piece together in my mind the three or four different things that they've done to get there. And it's tough to say this. I usually admire it and I go, man, that is really good. You put that together and then you fished them, then you get their credit card, then you pretend to be IT, then you double charge them when you get into their bank account. Man, really good job for you. Hooray. I'm disappointed because you shouldn't be doing that. But for us, we can't stop at all because for those hackers, again, just like any business, they're constantly innovating. For them, especially once they get found out on kind of one technique or one piece of malware, it usually gets shut down by cybersecurity companies and professionals like us. And so as a result, they have to innovate. So for them, they're very much in the mantra group of having to keep moving because being stagnant is the end of the business for them. So for us, yeah, finding ways to prevent things from happening, but more importantly, and one of our larger focuses these days and from our company is about coming in and saying, hey, what are the things that we can do when they go wrong? How can we get back online? How can we have backups? How can we train our executives and our communications teams to talk about this? How do we talk to the press? How do we talk to our employees? All of those things go into those cycles. And so, especially at the DOE, they've actually rolled out a number of prescriptive things. And Dylan, this comes back to what I was talking about earlier. The DOE has done a great job of running out and saying these are requirements if you're going to be working with nuclear information to protect that information. Here's a set of things that we want you to do to reduce that risk. It won't reduce it to zero, but it should help. One of my former employers is a major energy provider. And we had to work closely with the Department of Energy because they ran nuclear power plants. That's a huge place and a lot of liability for that company, a publicly traded company, to handle and manage. But that's where the DOE can exercise those rights and say, hey, we're going to give you access to this and you can use it and run these nuclear plants. But we've got some stipulations that go with it. The company has no choice but to comply. But that's, in this case, I would argue, for the betterment of society.
What is your sense? So I believe that there is a future event in our lifetimes that I would describe as the great hacking. And that when and where that happens, I do not know. But what that consists of could be anything from taking all the cars in the world at the same time and making them all go a hard left. It could be, taking all of the refrigerators in the world and making them all shoot ice. And it obviously can be the most obvious one will be to drain all the bank accounts in some sort of Bondian villain sense. But how real is the risk of a globally orchestrated great hacking as opposed to these asymmetrical, stochastic, constant pitter patter of activity, but on an individual or institutional specific basis?
About 15 years ago, we were always talking about a cyber Pearl Harbor. When those of us in the industry were looking to get the attentions of boardrooms and the government to invest in cybersecurity, we said at some point there's going to be this watershed moment that's going to get everybody invested and involved. And we all sat around waiting for it. And we're here in 2024 and it's never happened. And you know what I think is happening? I think we are the frogs in a boiling pot. As I talked about earlier, we've become numb to these breaches. We've become numb to our data being stolen. And we go, well, all the social security numbers in the US were just stolen. And I don't think anybody blinked an eye. I'm not sure I even saw it on the normal news in the morning covering it because everybody pretty much has washed themselves of it and become numb to it. My argument is I don't think that moment is coming. We can think about back in July when the large event happened with CrowdStrike and a lot of the major airlines grounding all planes in the US and some of the world as well. We haven't seen a moment like that since 9/11. So there is a major moment. And I'll tell you what, nobody was talking about on Monday. Now you can make an argument about changes in the Democratic presidential nomination may have blended that and buried that in the news cycle. But that was a major moment, and that should have been the thing that happened. And I don't think that moment is ever going to come. I think we've already passed that threshold. The water is boiling. What does that mean in the future? I think these things are going to keep happening, and I think major ones will happen. The Department of Homeland Security has identified some parts of our industries or some industries as critical sectors, things like finance and healthcare and energy, is saying, hey, if something happens here, it may impact more than just a couple people or cause some large problem across the US. But even still, I think those events are going to keep happening. And I think some of them are going to be quite large. For us as consumers, there's not a lot we can do in that case because some of these companies that handle maybe pipeline transmission across most of the Southeast, you've probably never heard of Colonial Pipeline until suddenly you couldn't get gas at a gas station a few years ago. So there's a lot of companies that are involved in this that we as consumers may not even know are handling our information or
I
handled
would
that
think
much
that
across it.
isn't the sort of bullseye target financial institutions and credit card companies at the end of the day?
That's the easiest one, right? I think the main motivator for a lot of hacking groups is money, right? Helps them pay their bills bluntly, but also continue to fund their operations, grow their operations. Sure sounds like a startup to me. So for them, right, money is usually that first place to go. I steal your identity. I can sell it on the dark web, get a couple bucks, do it 1,000 times. That's a couple more bucks. Yeah, steal from a financial institution, healthcare. But a lot of those sectors are the ones that are investing the most heavily in cybersecurity protections. So now they start going to other places trying to find out what can we do with it. Some hacking groups, though, as a reminder too, especially those that are funded by nation states, they're not focused on money. They're usually focused on information. And it's not even the information that you think. For example, a lot of higher ed institutions are actually targeted for their research, especially if, say, you had maybe 1 billion mouths to feed. You'd probably want to figure out how can we grow more sustainable crops that give better yields. That's not money related, but for them, that's valuable information. If I can get 80% of my cornfield to give me corn as opposed to 35%, that's also valuable information. So while money, I think, is usually a main motivator, there's lots of other things that can be motivators for different groups.
And I guess my last question is it true or false that 50% of all passwords in the world are in fact the word password?
I don't know if it's 50%, but it is higher than it should be. Now, I'm going to make the argument, right? There's lots of extra protections in place these days, like two-factor authentication. So if you log in your email and you have to enter a second set of numbers, your password is almost moot at that point, right? Because you have that extra layer of protection, which is good. That being said, right, we always recommend choosing a strong password. And I will also be blunt and critical of the industry. Passwords are a huge problem. They're not friendly. We reuse them across websites because they're hard to remember. And while there's lots of tools like password managers, it's not easy to manage that. And it's definitely not savvy or easy for people who are not technologically savvy to pick those up and use them. So for the cybersecurity industry at large, we're still searching for a better way because passwords just aren't working.
Why not biometrics?
I think biometrics is the way, and we've started to see some things around passkeys. You may have been prompted on websites, using your Touch ID or your Face ID. And I think that's a good place. But last I checked, passwords get stolen a lot. And the cool part about my password is I can change it, and now it's not stolen. Can I change my fingerprint or face if it gets stolen? Not really. So that part scares me a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, Alex, listen. At worst case, if there's the great hacking, you just got to remember what it was like in 96. Fax machines. We'll be fine.
It's going to be fine.
We should do like a fire drill once a year as a collective global civilization and see if we can function in 1996.
Let's bring back out the paper. I'm all for it at this point. I would be happy to be out of a job. That sounds wonderful.
The company is called Hive. What's the website?
You can find us online at www.hivesystems.com. We have a great blog that we maintain that just helps people understand cybersecurity concepts, and a great podcasting series as well that you can tune into and learn more about cybersecurity. So whether you're a practitioner or just want to know more, you'll find a lot of great content there.
Hivesystems.com.
That's right.
I'm Dylan Ratigan. This is Bootstrapping. More Tasty Live coming up after this.